That would be wonderful, thank you. I'll just clarify when we're going, Chair.
Okay. Oh, by the way, is there a consultant with this application?
The YouTube stream is now live, Chair. I'll pass over to you. Thank you. You're on mute, Councillor Mrs. Jones.
I'll hear that in my sleep. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Councillor Doris Jones and I'm the Chair of the Planning Application Committee. For the benefit of those members of the public, I will make the necessary introductions and would appreciate if each person would show their hands as I mention you. We've got Mr. Dave Coates. Mr. Coates is the Principal Planning Officer, Head of Planning, Development Management and Environmental Health. Dave. Lisa Hutchinson, not with us today, is she not? No. Mr. Andrew Errington is our Planning Government Lawyer. Andy, were you there somewhere? Yep. And then Mr. Paul Dalton is the Democratic Services Officer, and Paul's role is to do the minutes of the meeting and count all the necessary votes. Paul, thank you. As with elected members, please show their hands if you can, just so that if any members of the public can say who are councillors and who are officers, and who's making the votes, because these are the people who will make the decisions and vote on each application. As Planning Committee Chair, then my role of Chair is to maintain order at the meeting and ensure that meetings proceed in accordance with the Council's planning protocol. However, in the event of any votes being tied at any matter, I will have the casting vote. Thank you. Paul, can you do any introductions? Any absence? Any apologies?
Yes, Chair. I'll just go through the list like we normally do at previous meetings. If members can just confirm their attendance for the record, please. Councillor Allen.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cousins.
Present here, Mr. Dalton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Heslop.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Keir.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lee.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Lister. Now, Councillor Lister did forward her tentative apologies earlier in the week if she couldn't make it. I noticed she's not on the participants list. I will keep an eye out to see if she joins us. Councillor Marshall.
I'm here.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCollum.
Present, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tate.
Also here.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tosterman.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Wallace.
Here.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any declarations of interest from members, please? Councillor Toscovin.
Thank you, Chair. I've been in item number 5 on the agenda, West Newbiggin Farm. So it's my intention to leave the meeting now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Toscovin. Thank you. Can we approve the minutes, please, of the meeting of the 17th of February? Members, can somebody move them for me, please? Thank you, Councillor Clark. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Allen. All approved. Can we go through the introductions of proceedings? And I will hand that over to the Assistant Director of Law and Governance, Mr. Errington. Mr. Errington, please.
Thank you, Chair. We begin by the Planning Officer presenting their report on the application. Once they've finished, if the ward councillor has expressed a wish to speak, they'll be invited to do so. Members can then ask questions of the applicants or agents if they're in attendance. Just to confirm that this is just for questions and is not an opportunity for the applicant or agent to make a presentation. The Planning Officer will then summarise the key planning issues and officers will take any questions from members. The Planning Officer can then make a further summary. Members will then debate the matter and formulate motion or motions on which to vote and make a decision. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. That takes us to item number 5, applications for planning. And the application today is West Newbiggin Farm, Norton Back Lane, Sadburge. Mr. Coates will talk us through it. Dev.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This application, the only application on the agenda today, is for the conversion, alteration, extension of existing agricultural buildings to form 9 dwellings of various sizes. It also includes the demolition of the former piggeries on site, but just in broader context, the first slide that you see is just the location. You'll see Sadburge lower centre of the screen, and to the northeast of the site, up Norton Back Lane, and up northwards towards New Biggin Hamlet, West New Biggin Hamlet. That's the general location. Next slide, please, Mike. That's a more in-depth look, more focused view from the Ordnance Survey sheet. You'll see the buildings outlined in red, and you'll also notice at the bottom right-hand side of the screen an egg poultry unit, which is a relatively recent addition to the area, and it's an operational business which also uses this access area. One of the key things I would like to stress right at the outset, Chair, is that there is an extant or a live planning permission for this site for a very similar but not identical scheme, which goes back to, I think it's 2007. All the conditions have been discharged and an effective start and implementation has occurred. So as a fallback position, there is a possibility or reality that the 2007 permission could in fact be implemented tomorrow if need be. So we have what we call in planning terms a fallback position. So I'd like members to bear that in mind when they start to deliberate on this particular application. This application, in my view, does present a significant difference and improvement to the last scheme, because I generally believe it is a more holistic approach, a more comprehensive approach to developing out all of this site, which includes taking down buildings of no particular merit, in particular the piggeries, and taking up of concrete apron areas which the previous scheme wouldn't necessarily have taken into account. So just in context, there are differences between what has planning permission already and what we're actually looking at today. But my genuine view is that this scheme is preferable and presents a better set of circumstances and a better way of building out the site. Next slide, please, Mike. That's an aerial shot, again showing the buildings in its entire. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just getting a bit of feedback, Paul.
Fine from this end, David. Okay,
great stuff. I'll continue. Just as that's an aerial shot showing the area with residential properties nearby. We have done a comprehensive consultation with statutory consultees. There's been no objections in principle from our highways engineer. I know there has been some focus of attention on the access to the site, and Mr. Howson, our highways engineer, is with us today, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer those questions when we get to that point. But nevertheless, he hasn't raised any issues in principle, nor has the environmental health officer or the historic environment record officer either. The local flood authority have also been consulted and subject to a number of conditions attached to the recommendation. Doris, can you turn your mic off? I think that's the problem.
You're on.
Apologies, folk. I think there was a little bit of feedback. Hopefully that's been rectified now. The Northumbrian Water Environment Agency have no issues either. On page 17, you'll note our Transport Policy Officer has recommended a significant contribution for sustainable transport in this location. It's not deemed to be absolutely necessary, because what they're actually saying is that it's in an unsustainable location, therefore effectively should be refused. But taking a balanced approach, Chair, I think it's much more important to look at conversions by their very nature are in the countryside, and it's not always appropriate to apply monies to provide bus services. So in terms of viability, particularly in terms of the size of this site, a contribution for transport sustainability isn't deemed to be necessary. East and West Newbiggin Parish Meeting has also objected. You'll see that on the bottom of page 17, Chair. They say it is outside the development limits, and indeed it is. It offers no affordable housing or 106 monies, but it does fall beneath the threshold where we would normally ask for affordable homes. The road is unsuitable for an increase in traffic, and the agricultural field which runs alongside the narrow road has recently been ploughed in such a way that there is a dangerous drop of several feet to the side of the access. They also maintain that access on to Norton Back Lane from West Newbiggin remains hazardous, and the disposal of both surface and fall water remains a problem. There is no mains drainage, and we'll come on briefly to talk about the right, there isn't any mains drainage, but as part of this scheme it is anticipated to make alternative arrangements for drainage by septic tank or cloud jesters. Parish Council, Sudbury Parish Council have also objected to the scheme, particularly concerned about the number of vehicles that passing through the Sudbury village, and that they have issues about traffic congestion, which may be created by this scheme. There are also a number of individual objections, Chair, which are highlighted on page 18, which very briefly, if I may go through and summarise. It's increase in number of dwellings on an unsustainable location, the drainage issue, condition in the previous planning approval about passing places were put onto the single track lane. Well, indeed that has occurred. The road consequently does get used for other people rather than just direct access to the settlement itself, and the parish council suggests it's people drinking, eating, leaving rubbish, and couples meeting. They also indicate that there are no pavements or cycle routes along that particular access road. Next slide, please, Mike. These are some of the whistle-stop tour around the site, really. These are the lesser buildings, dare I say, which nevertheless are structurally sound and capable of conversion, which of course is a requirement to fit into policy H7. It can't be just any old building, it needs to be something of substance, and the structural survey that has been submitted with the application does make very clear that these buildings are capable of structural alteration without them being demolished. Next slide, please, Mike. That's the
whole last paragraph there.
Sorry, Councillor Key, did you want to contribute?
Can we let the planning officer complete and then finish what he's saying, and then we can ask questions later? Dave, continue.
Thank you.
Just Dave was breaking up.
Somebody having a technical problem?
I think it's my system.
Councillor Kay's got a problem with his computer, I take it, yes?
Can everybody else hear me, members? Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, fine.
It might be worth switching to the SIM card and Councillor Kia. If it's your broadband.
Councillor Tate seems to have a problem. I've took my
Shall I continue, Chair? Or should we wait for Councillor Keir to... Can you hear me now, Councillor Keir?
Paul, do we know if Councillor Keir can hear all right? And Councillor Tate?
I'm good. I don't know what's happened there. I don't know what's going on there. So I've moved into a different room, but it may still be the same. So take it for you. Thank you.
Cheers. Are you okay, Councillor Tate? You can hear us okay?
Yeah, I haven't got any issues.
Great stuff. I'll continue, Chair, if I may. I'm just making reference to policy H7 regarding conversions in the countryside, and structural reports have been submitted to say all of these buildings are capable of alterations without complete demolition. The piggery that you see there at the bottom is the timber less than attractive building, which will be removed as part of the proposal. Next slide, please, Mike. These are the more interesting buildings, which are part of the overall conversion process. You'll see when we come to the elevations, Chair, that a deliberate attempt through the design process has been made to retain all the existing openings, which is generally good practice when you're looking at conversion of buildings, to retain some degree of character of what's there rather than to do massive wholesale changes. So I'm satisfied that the architect has endeavoured to do that wherever possible. Next slide, please, Mike. This is a picture of the access road, which you'll see is quite narrow. There has been an issue regarding how that field has been ploughed, which either side, which indicates that there is effectively a ditch to one side of the road, which anybody who was driving dangerously or too fast or not paying attention would have the potential to slip into. But perhaps I can leave that to Mr. Howson to make any particular comments on that particular highway issue. To go back what I was saying before, with this particular scheme, it represents a much more holistic way of dealing with the site, and in terms of end result, a much more comprehensive and better scheme than the previous scheme, which, as I indicated, is still extant, it is still live, and it could drop back onto it. But it's reflected in the recommendation how much better this scheme is, Chair, and an officer's preference, if one of the two sites were going to go forward, it'd be the one we're looking at now. Next slide, please, Mike. We've split the site into two for presentation purposes, Chair, just so it's hopefully fairly clear. This is the northern part of the site, where you'll see there's the 4 or 5 units on there, one at the top and one in a horseshoe at the bottom, including garage blocks. And next slide, please, Mike. And that's the southern end of the site, incorporating the rest of the site. You'll notice all of the unattractive concrete aproned areas are removed, as are the less than attractive piggery timber buildings. They've been removed as well. So it does represent a much more holistic approach. Next slide, please, Mike. Here we are. Here's the elevations. Hopefully members will cast their minds back a few moments ago when those buildings were shown before conversion. You'll see most of the openings within the building, within the conversion, have been respected. It represents a pretty good effort, I think, in terms of what we're seeking to achieve when buildings are converted, and it's the retention of important physical characteristics. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, thanks, Mike. Next one, if there is. that's another view. And again, retaining where possible openings. There's an interesting break into on either side above the glazed area, which breaks into the roof. But nevertheless, it does reflect the overall pitch of the existing roof. It doesn't project out from it. Next one. This is the more modernistic effort. Again, well designed in my view. It is unashamedly different, but nevertheless does reflect the character of the existing buildings around it. The next one, I think that might be the last one, Mike. This is the point, perhaps when we start to discuss this, that members may well have the most interest in terms of access and accessibility to the hamlet from Norton Back Road. As part of the previous permission, the extant permission, the live permission, we did negotiate 6 passing places along that road. The slide's gone. There we go. 6 passing places along that road, which are highlighted with red circles. They're actually in. They're actually being done. As part of this proposal, we've negotiated another 2, and that forms part of a condition should members be minded to grant this application. So as well as what you see there in terms of passing points, there is an additional 2 which would be a requirement of any permission, and they would be negotiated between the applicant and indeed residents of West New Biggin Farm. There's the best position to actually place them. I can hear somebody's phone on. Oh, sorry. Okay, so in summary, Chair, the proposed development does comply with the relevant conversion policies of the local plan. It is a good effort, a better than good effort, at taking all the normal things we would take into account about preserving architectural features and utilising existing spaces. So it's done that. It's done that well. There has been a structural report, or reports submitted for all of the buildings, and we're satisfied that they are capable of alteration without demolition, which is a requirement of the relevant policy. So we're satisfied about that. We're also satisfied it doesn't detract from the character of the area. I think there's always a position if this permission didn't go forward for any reason, and the previous one wasn't implemented, you'd have a series of agricultural buildings which are beyond their functional use, and they would wither and die. And I just see there's an opportunity here to actually do something worthwhile and provide dwellings at the same time. We're satisfied that it does comply with paragraph 79 of the NPF, which gives guidance on dwellings in the countryside. And in light of the fallback position from the previous planning permission, we consider that it's acceptable in terms of highway safety. Looking at those 6 passing places which are in place and negotiating additional 2. And our highways officer feels that that is a satisfactory way of dealing with access and accessibility. The recommendation, Chair, is to grant planning permission. If I can just very quickly refer you to a number of the more important planning conditions. Condition number 3 relates to construction work, which is a fairly standardised approach. Number 4, we've got landscaping scheme, bin storage, which is a key thing. Number 6 relates to remediation, verification from environmental health in terms of contaminated land. There's a sequential approach to go through there to ensure that the ground is in a fit state to be built upon. Condition number 9, Chair, on the bottom of page 28, talks about a programme of archaeological work. Condition number 11 relates to the implementation and maintenance of the management of the sustainable surface water drainage scheme. All of these things are accepted in principle, incidentally. It's the details of how that actually works is that the relevant agencies are interested in. And perhaps looking at the slide we're looking at, particular relevance, condition 15 on page 30, Chair, talks about the additional 2 vehicle passing places through West Newbiggin. They're not actually identified, but is a requirement for the developer to come back to us to agree those particular places before development starts, which is particularly important. So the recommendation, Chair, is to grant planning permission to those 19 conditions within the report. And over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I be heard by everybody okay? Because it echoes if I put this on for Dave. Can you all hear me okay now? Yes. Thank you, somebody. We have the agent here, who I'll bring in first, and I just want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that the agent can only answer members' questions, and it's Mr. Steve Barker. Mr. Barker?
Good afternoon, Chair.
Thank you. Have members any questions of Mr. Barker? I have one, Mr. Barker, please. I'm looking at the foul water and how it's going to be removed, and I see that the plan is to have individual foul water runoff for each individual property. My concern there is if you have a bad neighbour who doesn't do the necessary maintenance for his foul water, it could affect the rest of the properties. I see Environment Health would prefer to see one for all properties combined. Can you respond to that for me, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the proposal is to have individual private treatment plants. They're not septic tanks or cesspits, they're comprehensive treatment plants. And they can only work in practice if you are able to provide individual ones for each dwelling. It will not work if you try to deliver comprehensive treatments where you've got multiple families dealing with them. The practicalities of it in terms of the operations just simply don't allow a communal system to succeed. You also will find that there is a degree of adaptation required if you're responsible for your own packaged treatment plant, in that you have to understand and learn that you have a biological treatment process in operation, and that treatment process requires you to sort of be a little bit more cautious and careful about what you put into the system. For anybody that has a package treatment plant, and I'm actually an individual who has one because I live out in the sticks, the first time you put harsh cleaning chemicals down and cause it all the good bacteria to die, you quickly realise that that's a style of living that you're going to have to adapt and change. If you've got a communal system and one person upsets it by putting down harsh cleaning products, you can have a fairly significant mess on your hands for a number of people. So the system, the approach that we've got is a practical one that will work, and communal systems do not work when you've got private treatment plants. They'll work if you're dealing with cruder systems such as cesspits, etc., but they don't work when you've got individual package treatment plants. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, time will tell. Can I bring in Councillor Marshall, please?
Thanks, Chair. My question was exactly the same, and with a further point, and it was about the separate treatment plants, and the fact in the informatives on page 31 and 32, particularly page 32, is that the Environment Agency would prefer a combined, a shared treatment plant approach. Now, I've heard what the agent said, and he's saying that they aren't practical. If they aren't practical, why are the Environment Agency recommending this? I can't for the life of me see recommending a process that won't work. I don't know whether you have an answer to that, Steve.
I don't know why they believe that that is a better way forward. As I said, I'm a person that owns one, operates one, and lives with one, and I cannot conceive of the idea of sharing one with my neighbours. It's a very strange and bizarre idea to me as someone who has one. You also have the practical difficulties of all the various pipework runs that you've got to sort out as well. But that's not really the issue. It's the practicality of being responsible for cleaning up your own mess and operating your own household in a manner that doesn't upset the treatment plant. This is one of those very rare occasions when I would respectfully disagree with an undertaker from a practical point of view. I do not do that lightly or normally, as Mr. Coates will attest. But I, as I said, I do live with one. I do understand what's involved, and with the greatest of respect to the agency, it's simply impractical and will not work.
Sorry, Andrew. Could I just ask a further question? I noticed on the informative it invites you to contact the Environment Agency for more information. Have you taken that opportunity to talk to the Environment Agency to see how it would work? Or is this just what you prefer?
It's not necessarily what I prefer. It's knowledge of running one and speaking with architects, agents, and surveyors responsible for selling the property. The advice consistently is everybody needs to be responsible for managing and processing their own waste and looking after their own waste. A communal system on a unit like this is simply a nightmare waiting to happen. The first house, the first household that puts a cleaning chemical down it will render a toxic soup for the other 9 properties, the other 8 properties using the same system. That will happen.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Heslop.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want, having read the report and also some of the objections about an ageing electricity supply in the near hamlet and also about low water pressure. Has there been any thought or consideration about making this development zero carbon, so everything is self-sufficient, including sort of the water, etc., as well as electric vehicle charging points, which are going to come? And if there hasn't, within the development, has there been any thought about the upkeep or the uptake that the future owner will have of their property to upgrade for, you know, not carbon storage, electric energy storage, batteries, etc.? I hope that's clear.
Well, I've got answers for you on part of that, Councillor Heslop. In terms of the water side, yes, that's an issue that we've had to look at quite closely. It's been one of the concerns that have prevented the scheme from coming forward so far, and you'll see that's been referred to in the officer report. Even though historically the farmstead is a former pig farm, and anybody connected with the farming industry will know that pigs consume a significant amount of water, that supply was deemed not suitable and not potable to serve the new dwellings. So one of the actual requirements of the scheme, and indeed one of the significant costs that the applicant has to bear to bring the scheme to the market, is bringing across a significant distance new water supplies to serve the development. So this, just to reassure you on that particular point, the scheme will not rely on the existing water supply, but wholly new water supplies are going to be brought in across the fields to serve the development, to provide new potable standards of water. So that's the area that we've gone into quite forensically, and some of the rules and regulations about potable water supplies for individual properties are quite harsh to deal with. But nevertheless, we've looked at that. I don't have quite such a satisfactory answer for you in terms of electric charging points and management of electricity on site. Certainly in terms of capturing and storing it on site, the simple and blunt answer is no, we haven't made any provision for battery storage. I think that's an area that we're all going to have to get to grips with in time to come, and I fully agree with your sentiments, but I don't think we have an industry that's ready to service and help us with that at this moment in time. And I speak as a consultant who's working with national companies putting in significant commercial scale battery storage facilities. I'm working with Semcor, building several sites around the country with that. And they're challenging to do on a commercial scale, never mind individual property scales. But I'm absolutely sure that you're raising an issue that we will have to get to grips with probably within 5 years or so. We just don't have a ready-made market for it at the individual property level at the moment. We tend to stick with photovoltaics on roofs, powering ground source heat pumps and the like at the moment, which is helpful, but not. I don't think that fully answers your question, does it?
I'm just aware that other authorities, such as York, for example, have made it as part of their whole planning process that new developments, would be zero carbon, etc., etc., with, electric charging points. So,
yes.
No,
indeed. It's something we're going to have to do. My office is here in Darlington on Woodlands Road, and I've already laid a big electric cable in my property to go to an outside electric charging point when I get my next vehicle. So I'm with you. I'm with you in spirit and halfway there in practice, but not quite yet on this scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heslop. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions really. One is a couple of the specific items have already been mentioned by other councillors, but I have concerns that there don't seem to be any kind of sustainable futuristic developments within your development at all. I mean, apart from the obvious if there isn't a solar panel in sight. And bearing in mind, this council is committed to zero carbon, etc. We also, on planning, have more or less agreed that any future developments should be totally sustainable and should also the buildings themselves. Can you guarantee that your buildings will last, for argument's sake, 100 years? Because one of the things that we have found is building things and then having to go and retrofit within 5 or 10 years to us isn't particularly acceptable. My other point is paragraph 49 on page 25. The second and third lines say compensation and enhancement measures are required to be incorporated into the redevelopment. This is regarding impact on ecology, but I wondered, as I don't seem to see anything in the conditions requiring this, I wondered if you can tell me what you intend to do regarding the ecology side of things within your site, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, in terms of the energy side, well, you posed a couple of questions, I think, on the energy and sustainability side within one area. I think one of the points you raised was about the longevity of the buildings. If the buildings are made wind, weather and watertight and have got a productive use, then yes, I think I can give you that assurance quite comfortably. The officer report makes it clear that these are the majority of the buildings on the site are ones that have been on the site for 150 or so years already. They're not quite listable, but they're almost of listable quality. This was I think it's been described as a high status farmstead in terms of its origins as far as the conservation team have looked at. So the buildings were put up well to a good standard. They are by agricultural standards quite unusual, and as I said, only a step down from listing. Sadly, they're of absolutely no use to modern farming purposes, and so if we don't find a use for them, they're not going to be around much. But this application is very much geared around trying to find a long-term positive use for them so that they are there for future generations. And I think I can give you that assurance quite comfortably. In terms of the energy side of it, I suspect that the absence of information at this stage, it doesn't mean that we're not dealing with it in the manner that you would wish. It's something which perhaps in the future you're likely to require more information from us when your new local plan comes forward and it becomes a new requirement going forward. But based on where you are at the moment, it tends to get dealt with outside of planning under the building regulation stage. So the fact that you don't have information here at the moment doesn't mean that it won't be approached in a very sustainable manner. For example, the most barn conversions of any size and scale make use of heat pump technology to heat them. When you're putting in the new floors in these properties, they are tailor-made for that sort of heating, which is highly sustainable and encouraged. It solves a lot of practical problems as well related to barn conversions that you perhaps might not appreciate. So it tends to get used as the heating source of choice, and it becomes sustainable by its very nature. But we tend not to deal with it now in planning, and I do appreciate the point that you're making. In terms of the ecology point, you'll appreciate that we've had a detailed study of the site from Naturally Wild. They've been out on site previously, they know the site well, and we've got a good working relationship with them. And they provide, as part of their service, a full mitigation set of proposals. And it is normal practice for a planning condition to be imposed requiring that mitigation to be delivered as part of the scheme. And we have absolutely no problem with that. You know, the applicant is a farmer that's very committed to managing wildlife and promoting it. So you know, he would have absolutely no qualms on that score. You know, the fact that barn owls are found on the site is largely down to his encouragement of the barn owls on the site, for example. So he would be very upset if they didn't stay in the area.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Doris. You're on mute, Doris.
I'm shouting to Councillor Lee's on mute, and I'm on mute. Sorry, Gerald. Councillor Lee, it's your turn. Sorry about that.
I was reading your lips there, Chair.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Well, in fairness, I think most of the questions have been asked by Councillor Marshall and Councillor Allen and Councillor Heslop, which are very, very relevant. I have a lot of sympathy, however, with the Transport Officer, because this isn't a sustainable site whatsoever. But I also acknowledge that National Planning Policy Framework sort of kicks that into touch. I mean, I seem to remember, and David may correct me here, where sustainability on transport issues was a genuine reason for turning applications down. But with National Planning Policy Framework, of course, that thought that idea has been kicked into touch, which is quite sad. But it was one reason why I did think, as Councillor Marshall made clear, why we should go for the one system, the PTP planned system, because if nothing else, it does at least reduce the number of vehicle travels going to site, albeit 10 visits opposed to one, possibly every year, because all these things are relevant and very, very important. As you'll have picked up, Mr. Barker, there is an awful lot of thought and concern for our carbon emissions, and it saddens me really that you don't take the opportunity when you submit ideas like this is to quantify and describe precisely what you would do to reduce the carbon emissions on this small development. you suggested that you may using was it air power pumps, whatever they were called.
Heat pumps.
Yeah, heat pumps, which is fine, but there's no certainty on that. You may or you may not. Why you don't put solar panels on at this stage when, let's face it, you've got the walls, but there's nothing on the roof, so you'll be doing work up there as well, which is a far cheaper way of doing it. You could, in your application, to keep everybody happy, you could have described what building standard it was going to be built to as far as energy conservation and any efficiencies were concerned. You could include Councillor Heslop's point about battery charging points in the units, because it will have to come. And it will, if you don't do it now, it's going to cost an arm and a leg to do it retrospectively. So, there, as you've already said, there is nothing in our planning policy, but let us emphasise the importance that each councillor within Darlington Borough Council are linked into, triggered into, and are very, very keen to see our carbon emissions reduced. And all the planning applications, all the building which we were getting, every developer, every agent will be getting similar questions put to us. So whilst you are suggested something may happen or may not happen, and we don't have the power to do anything about it, let me just say it's sad that we've got to sit here with the carbon emergency, which we're all very conscious of, and we're sitting here to make a judgment on a planning application, which we are told may or may not be energy efficient and reduce carbon to a minimum. So with that, Mr. Barker, as I say, we can't do anything about it, but it's a shame that you don't, as a Darlington man particularly, that you haven't reached out to help Darlington Borough Council in striving to meet our obligation to reduce our carbon footprint. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
May I have a moment?
Sorry, Mr. Barker. Yes, please do.
Because I think Mr. Lee's taken from my Councillor Lee's taken from my comments, suggesting that I'm evading all responsibility on carbon and not putting information forward. Which I wouldn't like him to think that we're avoiding it. I'm making the points in my earlier comments that we provide the council the information that it requires based on its policies and validation criteria that are in force. At this moment in time, you haven't stipulated that you want a full carbon assessment or any form of energy reporting as part of the validation of planning applications. The minute you do so, that becomes a requirement imposed on all of us, and we will universally comply with it. The fact that you don't have that as a validation criteria doesn't mean that we don't give consideration to energy conservation, and we work through the relevant areas of legislation to deal with that. At this moment in time, within Darlington Borough, that is primarily dealt with through the building regulations and through our discharge of all of the fine detail of the construction process at the building regulation stage. Ground source heat pumps and other technologies will be used in the scheme, not may be used, they will be used, and their details will be submitted as part of the building regulation packages that are considered and approved by your officers in the building regulations section of the council. So I don't think it's fair to point your finger at me and say that I'm not dealing with it responsibly and that I'm evading it. I'm absolutely not. I'm simply making the point that at this moment in time, you don't have a requirement in the planning system for this all to be provided to you. If you did, we would provide it.
Well, I'll just come back on that. If I just very, very quickly, Chair, I'll accept as far as it go. You know, you're dealing with red tape, but you're dealing here with borough councillors who will not be involved in that discussion. So it is it would be very nice and very helpful if we could be informed of it at this stage. So at least we know that what we are passing ticks all the boxes as that we are concerned with as individual councillors and councillors across the borough.
Okay, Councillor Lee, I would like to bring Mr. Coates in. He can help you with some of those answers, please. Dave.
Thanks, Chair. Just as I'm listening to the debate, and just by way of compromise, I fully appreciate a number of members are very keen to look at the sustainability of this site at different levels, and we've explained why, whilst in strictest terms, locationally, it isn't a particularly sustainable site, but nevertheless that is allowed in planning policy, and indeed the national reaffirmed the national planning framework. I think the detail here, hopefully I am correct, is that members are quite keen to see some form of sustainability strategy in terms of heating programme or carbon emissions programme, and Mr. Barker has quite rightly pointed out that we don't, as it stands, have any formal planning hook to enable us to do that at this stage, and it is quite correctly dealt with under the building regulations. And going by what Mr. Barker said, and no reason to disbelieve that, you know, ground heat pumps and all the rest of it will form a part of that sustainable process. I'm just wondering, in the spirit of compromise, I don't think there's an awful lot to disagree with here, and would members be minded to consider a condition that goes on to the planning permission, which basically meets what Mr. Barker says is going to happen anyway through the building regulations. So members would be cited, or at least the planning department would be cited on the potential alternatives to consider carbon emissions on the site. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coates. I think that's something for members to discuss when we come to the vote. I think it's certainly worthy of consideration. Can I bring in Councillor Kane? But before I do, Councillor Lee, I do apologise. I wasn't cutting you off. I just felt that Mr. Coates could perhaps answer the question because he could see where you were coming from. Councillor Kerr, please. Are you with us, Andy?
I am, thank you, Chair. I've just getting myself unmuted, and so Mr. Barker could see me.
You were waking up, okay.
It's more of the, it's a bit more of the same. I mean, I think the way you've handled this and the way you've been complimentary and sympathetic to the thing, to the whole site, is fantastic. I think all of that is good. We want to see that going. But in line with Councillor Heslop, Councillor Lee, even if it isn't in the regulations, and you probably are going to do it, if we'd have seen that would have warmed our hearts more than us having to sort of bring it to you, the fact that you know, you're going to be using the heat pumps, because as you can hear from most of the feedback you've had, is we are certainly keen to future-proof, and even to the extent of charge points. We have an electricity supply to you or to the area that's low, or it's not very good, and you know, we're going to have to put charge points in there eventually, because 2030 they're not going to be. So if you'd have came forward with saying we're looking at this and that type of thing, I'm quite sure the folks in here you would have probably come in here and had a very sympathetic view on it. And we know it isn't there in our regulations, or we know it's not in our policies just yet. I think it's going to come, but at least you're talking about heat pumps, and if you'd have mentioned that and you were looking to the future, that'd have been great news for us, and we'd be looking at this as a real positive, because everything else on the site looks really fantastic for me, and I think you would have had a good vibe from us if you'd have came forward with some of those other things. Certainly at least electrical charge points, because obviously that's the first thing that people are going to, that's going to affect people, I think, going forward. And all the other stuff where you've mitigated the flooding and everything else, we can debate. You know, we've had a debate about that, but you've gave us, in my view, you've gave us a sound answer. So I think it would have been absolutely fantastic if you'd have mentioned the heat pumps, even though they're not in our policy, but it would have been an enhancement to your design if you'd have given us that. So with those few words, I think you can see the direction that Darlington Borough Council
can indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Marshall, are you asking to come back?
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. One, I'm going to be a bit like a dog with a bone here and go back to the the drainage and the combined units. There's been excellent planning permission here since 2007, I think. On the original planning consent, what was the treatment arrangements? What was it, individual or was it as the Environment Agency are recommending this time? I just out of interest. And the second question is, Mr. Berg, and you can answer them both together, is because of that, one of the things that stuck out from me on the application was that there has been this planning process going on since 2007. What is the intention of the developer to start work fairly quickly on this development, should it be passed today?
Right, okay. I think in answer to your first point, Councillor Marshall, the proposal, I'm speaking from memory here, and if Mr. Coates tells me I've got it wrong, I'm happy to be corrected. I wasn't involved in the previous proposals for the site, so you'll understand I've got a degree of hesitance. But my understanding was that it was individual septic tanks, which you'll appreciate are a stage down from packaged treatment plants. Packaged treatment plants produce clean water, or as close to it as it's possible to get. Septic tanks, crudely speaking, just filter out the solids. So a very significant difference between the two. But the planning world has been moving away from septic tanks and cesspits for a number of years. So this proposal that's before you, even though it's not a communal treatment plant, the fact that you've got individual packaged treatment plants is a significant environmental improvement over the use of individual septic tanks in the extant permission. So that's certainly the case. In terms of the applicant's intention, at this moment in time, he intends to actually convert one of the units for himself. He's actually decided he would like to move into one of the converted cart shed buildings at the front of the site. So he's already talking with various builders about bringing that forward. He's been trying to market the site, in fairness, as the officers know, for a number of years, and he's had various expressions of interest, but none of it's come forward and concluded in a deal. And we think the principal reason for that is that the site's never been tackled comprehensively. You know, the previous schemes have had wonderful schemes for conversion of individual units set against the backdrop of the loading bays of a concrete pig yard. And the previous schemes have not looked at the pig yard. They would still have been there, you know, as the backdrop. So by looking at it as we have done this time, we've tried to look at the totality of the site, to clean it all up, remove all of the extraneous buildings, and provide the sort of setting and framing for the barn conversions that, frankly, buildings of that quality need. You know, you're not going to be able to persuade a purchaser of a large converted Edwardian barn to come to it if he's got the remnants of a concrete pig feed unit in the centre of his yard outside his living room window, which sadly the previous scheme did have, and I'm not quite sure what was going on with that. And you know, I can't speak to that the flaws in that scheme, other than I look at them with some incredulity, frankly, that it wasn't tackled this way. But we are where we are, and we try to move forward with a bigger, better scheme that looks after the whole site, and it should certainly result in a number of improvements to the environment in the hamlet. As the officer report makes clear, if you're grubbing up a significant acreage of concrete hard surface, you're bound to have less problem dealing with surface water drainage in and around the area if you've got more permeable area. There's nothing worse for exacerbating flooding than a large concrete apron, which is what you've got at the moment. Moreover, on a sloping site, so it actually directs the water in exactly where you don't want it.
Thank you, Mr. Barker.
My concern on that, could I respond to that? My concern on that is that from the photographs, I've never been on the site, I'll be honest with you, and but the buildings do look, although you say they're structurally sound, and I accept that, to a layperson like myself, they look a little bit worse for wear, shall we say, and any significant delay, would that take away the reason for conversion, and would a condition be worth imposing to get work started within 18 months, 2 years, or whatever? Would that be reasonable?
Through you, Chair, that's perhaps a question that you're going to have to get guidance on from Mr. Coates. But
Thank you.
My advice from my side is that generally it's not an appropriate condition to bring forward. I can tell you that the site is on the market at this moment in time. So, you know, we are trying to find either individuals or a comprehensive development to take the site forward at this moment in time. So in terms of are we going to slack on it? No, we're not. We want the site to be developed, and we want the scheme to progress as quickly as possible. And you know, there'll be no delays on the part of the applicant in bringing forward his unit and trying to market the better scheme on the wider site.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Johnson now?
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Barker needs some support one way or another. I'm sure he's under contract to Mr. Twizel to produce the designs that we've been looking at. And why on earth should he produce things that we would like to see when we don't actually put them into our specifications? So I think it's totally unreasonable to expect a contractor to do something for us that is not part of the arrangement. So I'm sorry, Mr. Barker, that's my view.
Thank you very much.
You did your best.
I appreciate the support. I think the comments about electric car charging are absolutely valid, though, and I fully accept that we'll be doing it regardless of your planning policies that might or might not come forward. We're all going to be doing it inevitably as we go forward. As I said, you're preaching to a convert who's got a great big thick cable, thick as my arm, running through my office building at the moment.
Right, thank you, Mr. Barker. Thank you. Okay, you're doing the presentation now. That's naughty. Councillor Tate, I think you were next.
It was just to agree with Councillor Johnson. I think some of the questions that we've had so far have not been relevant. I think the climate change emergency that the council declared was not in respect of this. So I sort of agree with him. I think we've given him a hard time and there was no need to.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Tate. I'm going to ask Mr. Coates to do a sum up for us now, please. Can you summarise the application?
Before you do, if you give me 1 minute, I have an answer.
Sorry, Mr. Barker.
It's not a presentation, it's to deal with a query, Chair, that was raised in the earlier comments that came forward.
Answer the query then, thank you.
It was simply to advise the council and Mr. Coates that the ploughing of the field was not down to the applicant because he doesn't own that field. It's another farmer that had carried out the ploughing that you're talking about, and it was done, in his view, as an anti-poaching exercise. So I didn't want any of you to think that Mr. Twizel was responsible for the issues that have been referred to in earlier conversation. But thank you, Chair.
All right, Mr. Barker, thank you very much. I'm not cutting you off, but you are, all of the agents are under the same steam as yourself. I'm going to bring Mr. Coates in now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Very briefly, I've made a number of notes as a result of listening to the members' discussion, and notwithstanding the other stuff I'll summarise in a moment. Reading into the discussion with Mr. Barker, I don't think there's any gap, there's no disagreement about the potential of delivering some form of sustainable strategy and how these buildings are heated or powered. And I fully accept Mr. Barker's position in that, you know, this would be dealt with under the building regulations or under a separate regime. I'm just wondering whether, in the light of the discussions, there may be a degree of acceptance that a condition could be applied in this particular set of circumstances. I fully accept Mr. Barker's position in that it's not a requirement of validation per se, and I fully get that. However, in the spirit of compromise and making us feel, or members feel, that they're actually delivering a permission that's doing the right thing, is there some potential to agree a form of condition that might pull that thing together? I do have it written down, and I'll read it out, but I'll come back to that in a moment. There's another condition which would effectively be condition number 1 about electrical charging points. Now, I know, again, we don't have a firm policy hook on that issue, but installing these things in advance, in the spirit of cooperation and in delivering a permission that's worthwhile, it's a much cheaper way of doing it now, rather than trying to retrofit a little bit further down the line. And that's something I would ask everybody to take into account. And finally, just a bit of a tidying up exercise, really, housekeeping in terms of ecology and natural wild. There's clearly a report that's been submitted which is satisfactory. It was just a condition to tie in that report, so that would be effectively condition number 22, to make sure all ecology works were carried out in accordance with that report. It's just a housekeeping issue thing that. So my suggestion, my plea to Mr. Barker would be to, having listened to the conversation, if it's something that it's likely to happen anyway in terms of sustainable strategy for heating and supplying power to the building, and electrical charging points is going to happen anyway, and it's kind of the right thing to do. Is there an agreement we can reach in terms of a planning condition where members can be satisfied that that is the absolute intention as part of the planning process that your client would be committed to? So I'll leave that out there for the moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coates. Thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Allen, please? We're echoing again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Coates, you've actually just covered one of the points I was just going to make, which was to ask, despite Mr. Twisel's brilliant intentions on ecology, etc., with respect, he might not be there to oversee things like that in future. So I was wondering if we could bring a condition in whereby that would be there, and it would be there in perpetuity, so nobody could go along after Mr. Twisel's demise and dig up everything that he's just brilliantly put in. 2 points from me for my education, please. Paragraph 5, Mr. Coates, on page 16. I wanted to know why, under what I've seen normally is we get a planning application in and they are given so many years with which to commence building, as it were. Why is this an extant thing from 07, and why is it still prevalent in 2021?
To answer that question, Councillor Allen, you are absolutely right. We do impose statutory implementation timescales for a planning permission. That's, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it's usually 3 or sometimes 5 years. It can be extended to any period of time, and normally within that timescale, you would have to discharge any relevant conditions attached to that permission, and you'd also have to make a meaningful start, not completion, a start. And once that's done, once that two-pronged approach has been completed, i.e. you've discharged all the relevant conditions and you've made a start, that permission, the implementation period drops off, and that permission becomes extant in perpetuity. And that's exactly what's happened here. All of those conditions have been effectively discharged. An effective start has been made. So that particular permission, the fallback permission I think I referred to earlier on from 2007, could be started in theory tomorrow, but it does last in perpetuity. It does last forever in those circumstances.
Can I just ask on that one, Mr. Coates? Making a start doesn't mean turning a turf of grass over, end of.
It's quite.
It used to mean just staking out.
Yeah. Meaningful start. I mean, if we had 2 hours, I don't think we'd get through the case law for what effectively is a meaningful start. But you are absolutely right. Staking out is probably stretching it too far, but certainly digging foundations, putting in passing places within the access road, all would be well within a meaningful start. In addition to discharging the relevant conditions in combination, that means that there's a permission in place which is extant. But no, I think pegging out is perhaps too far, but certainly where there's engineering works, as has happened in this case in terms of insertion of the passing places, that is more than adequate to constitute a start.
Okay. And my second and final question, again for my education, page 17 regarding planning policies. Para 6, the first bullet point says that we are to ensure that the new development is located inside the development limits. And further down on the results of publicity and notification, it says the site is outside of development limits. So I can't get my head round the contradiction and why it's now acceptable.
Councillor Allen, you've obviously read the report in detail, so thank you for that. So did I, and initially I was rather confused by that particular point. Within the planning policy section, it is one of our considerations normally where there's a presumption in favour of development, is where development is within the housing development boundaries. Otherwise, it's generally a refusal. That's the way I would look at it. In this particular case, yes, our starting point was to consider the housing development boundaries, and quite clearly it is outside. Therefore, a different set of criteria in terms of policy framework kicks in, which is conversions in the countryside. But you're quite right, it is a little bit confusing, that, and it did confuse me when I first read it. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coates. I would like, do members want to debate this any further, or are we happy now to move to a vote? I think it's been well and truly aired. Does somebody want to move something, please? Councillor Marshall, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Chair, I'm still uncomfortable about. I think the development is a tremendous, from an architectural and development point of view, with the buildings and the conversions. I think it's a tremendous development. However, I'm still uncomfortable with this aspect of the Environment Agency and their shared treatment plant. I wonder what other members think about going against the preference of the Environment Agency, and I'm certainly uncomfortable with it. And I haven't been on planning that long. I've never seen a notifiable like this before, where they would like to take this opportunity to state that the preferred option would be to combine these into a shared process treatment plant. And I'm really uncomfortable. I'm not technical. I don't know the technicalities of it, but I'm uncomfortable about not taking that on board. And I just wonder what other members think about it.
All right, let's find out. Councillor Wallace, have you comments?
If we're in a position to move now, Chair, I think you said we are. I'm happy to move the recommendations as set out in the report. I don't believe we should be adding anything in the light of the very full answers we've received from the agent. I don't believe we need to add whistles and bells to this this resolution. So I would like us to make some progress, and I move.
Thank you, Councillor. I thought that seconded. Sorry, who seconded it?
Councillor Clark.
Or Tate.
Councillor Clark, I think I heard you first. So Councillor Clark seconded it. Yes. Paul, can you move something? Anybody want to move anything else other than that? No.
Just a comment, please.
Could I move an alternative that we accept it with an additional condition with the shared treatment plant? I'm very uncomfortable with where we are on it.
Chair,
have you got a seconder for that?
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair. But we've been put in a rather peculiar position here. We have two experts, one Mr. Barker on the one hand, who's obviously involved with the site, and then we have an external advisor, the environment agency, who are neutral, who are simply making a recommendation, and they're strongly saying to do it in one, and we happen to make a decision without really having all the full information. Surely it would be better perhaps to bring this back again next month and get this full explanation from the Environment Agency so we can make a proper informed decision. Because we're doing everybody an injustice here.
Okay.
I will support Councillor Marshall.
Okay, but I think I'm going to ask Mr. Coates your view on putting it back and bringing the Environment Agency for their report.
Thanks very much, Chair. What I would urge members to, I mean, the last thing I'd want to see is this is deferred and brought back, because I think we'll just get exactly the same position from the Environment Agency as we have now, and they've expressed a preference, and that's all it is. If there'd been something fundamentally wrong here, where they were objecting to this particular scheme, they would have said so. And there's all sorts of preferences when we receive consultation responses, and where there's a formal objection, we take it very seriously. And I think if we'd had that in this particular case, our recommendation wouldn't be the same, Chair. It is a preference, it's a technicality, and it's not something I would be giving particular weight to at this stage. Preference is one thing, an objection is another, and we don't have an objection to this scheme.
Thank you. Now, look, is anybody, I'm bringing the members in, their hands are raised. Sorry if I'm echoing, but please, questions that's not already been asked. Councillor Tate.
Yeah, I've had my hand up since you asked the debate on Alan Marshall's comment in regards to the
okay.
system.
Okay.
Listening to what Steve Barker said, obviously he has experience because he has that system, and I was happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tate, very much. Councillor Allen, have you anything different to ask that you've not already asked?
Yes, please. I recommend the officer's report, but with two conditions, both of which he has previously stated he is happy to do.
Which are you moving something?
Can we just deal with the original amendment, please, Chair?
Yeah, you're confusing it a little bit. Paul, do you want to sort this out? What have we got on the table now, please?
We do have some members indicating to speak, but what I have currently on the table is Councillor Wallace moving the officer's recommendation as outlined within the report, and that was seconded by Councillor Clark. And Councillor Marshall has moved an amendment which has been seconded by Councillor Lee, which I would probably seek some wording from Dave around an additional condition on a shared treatment plant. I'd rather deal with the amendment first before then taking any subsequent amendments, if that's okay, Chair.
That's fine, Paul, you do that.
Do you feel we need some wording, Dave, around Councillor Marshall's amendment, just for an additional condition? Sorry, Mr. Coates, you're on mute.
Apologies, members. I'm more than happy to draft something along those lines. I just feel we need to be fairly careful here, Chair. And it's actually a preference that's expressed from the Environment Agency without any objection. So I'm not really fully understanding why we're going down a particular route to specify that an applicant has to move forward in a particular way and without any evidence base, and that troubles me a little bit. But if that's members' instruction, of course I will draft an appropriate condition, but I'm less than convinced that we have any evidence base to do that.
Okay. Paul?
Do you feel we need to make an adjournment so that condition can be drafted and put to members?
I think before we have an adjournment, Paul, can I ask Councillor Heslop and Kay what they have to say, and then we'll have the adjournment. Councillor Heslop.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Mr. Coates. You mentioned about two additions. One was about electric charging points. Would that be feasible to put in as an extra and additional sort of, area of concern to vote on, rather than take the recommendation it is as it stands to add on to things like electric charging vehicle points.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Heslop. With your permission, Chair, just to go back, there were three particular issues that I felt could form part of members' consideration here. One was the issues around the sustainable strategy for heating of the buildings. And I think there was a level of agreement between the applicant's agent and ourselves, between members and him, that it's something that's going to happen anyway. But it'd be helpful if there was a degree of surety to make sure if members are making a positive decision today, we're armed and there's a degree of comfort with what actually is going to happen. The second condition I was suggesting to members was electrical charging points. And again, I don't think there's any particular disagreement there with the applicant's agent. It will be something that occurs, and it's just more sensible to do it now rather than try to retrofit it in 5 years' time, because it'd be unbelievably expensive. And the other one was just a bit of a housekeeping issue around ecology. That there is a very clear link in the report to Naturally Wild report, July 2020, and I think that could be tidied up by making it a condition to make sure that's implemented. So there's three elements, Councillor Heslop. There was the sustainable drainage strategy, which I think we've got an agreement on with everybody. Electrical charging points, which is just the sensible thing to do in terms of rather than retrofit, and a housekeeping issue regarding tying the Naturally Wild Eco report within the planning conditions. So
would I, Chair, be able to propose that as an amendment to Councillor Wallace's substantial?
Councillor Heslop, if that's your wish, you move your amendment.
Can we? Sorry to interrupt, members. We do already have an amendment on the table, and rather than just continually to make amendments upon amendments, if we can deal with the amendment that's on the table first, that'll either be carried and become the substantive motion, at which point members can then make further amendments if they wish, or alternatively, if the amendment falls, we revert back to the substantive motion, which Councillor Wallace has moved, and then again we can consider any further amendments on there. But I would rather deal with one thing on the table at a time.
Okay, Paul.
Mr. Dalton, can I just say something? I'm getting very nervous that we are not doing the job that we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to look at the report and make a decision on it. It's not our duty to reinvent the application, and that's what's going on now.
Can I also make a comment as well,
I agree. Can we tidy this up, please? Because I think everybody has had a fair opportunity to have their say.
Yes, I agree with you, Chair.
But we seem to be going over the same thing. So
I've got a point.
Councillor Kay and then Councillor Tate, and then we're back over to Paul to sort it out. Councillor Kay.
Yeah, I'm going to answer Councillor Marshall, who was asking what other folks think. I think the explanation given by Mr. Barker regarding the drainage system satisfied me that is the correct way to go. He's an expert on it. He's got systems. I do understand that the Environmental Agency did put that comment in, but as Mr. Coates says, it's not a regulation, that it's not a mandatory thing. And my mind, when I was reading that, I was thinking, why have individuals when you can have a good one? So my mind has changed, and I think we should. I would go with what Mr. Barker says, so that may alleviate the need for for Councillor Marshall's amendment, I think.
Right, Councillor Tate.
Aye, thank you, Chair. It's in regard to the recommendation that we put in about vehicle charging points, because it's the right thing to do. Ultimately, we didn't put it in for the estate that's going to be built at the Indonesian Road, 300 houses. We didn't say, we should put an electric charging point on every house. So I don't understand why we're saying now we're going to put it in on this one. It's not consistent.
Okay, you can voice out your vote, Councillor Tate. Paul, over to you, please, Paul.
If I can just ask, Chair, do you want to take an adjournment so that Mr. Coates can draft an appropriate condition to Councillor Marshall and Councillor Lee's amendment, just so we're all very clear on what we're voting on?
3 minutes, no more. Can you write in 3 minutes, Dave? 3 minutes, Paul, no more.
I'll try my best.
Okay, Chair, we're good to restart now. Thank you.
Right, can you start the amendments, the vote, Paul, please? I think we're ready to make a vote.
Perhaps I can come back with the wording.
Right.
Chair, is that helpful to start with? The wording that I've been asked to draft relates to the difference between individual plants and a shared treatment plant. And the wording is, prior to the commencement of the development, a scheme shall be submitted to and approved by the local authority, which details a shared treatment plant to service all of the properties within the development. And the reason for that would be to ensure the effective discharge / treatment of effluent from the site.
Happy with that, Councillor Marshall?
I'm happy with that.
So,
thank you, Dave.
Right, Paul. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this vote, to be very clear, is on the amendment moved by Councillor Marshall and seconded by Councillor Lee. So it's granting planning permission subject to the 19 conditions outlined in the report and condition 20, which has just been read to us by Mr. Coates. Okay. So if you can indicate whether you're voting for or against the amendment. Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Cousins.
Against.
Councillor Heslop.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Against.
Councillor Keir.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Lister's not with us. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor Tate.
Against.
And Councillor Wallace.
Against.
Thank you. If you bear with me, Chair. So, Chair, it's 3 votes for the amendment, 9 votes against the amendment. The amendment has fallen. We initially go back to the substantive motion that was moved by Councillor Wallace and seconded by Councillor Clark, that being that officer recommendations in the report be approved. However, I'm conscious that the members might have other ideas.
Right, can we take that to the vote? Paul?
Sorry, Chair, did you want to seek members' views as to whether they had any further amendments? I'm sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
I hear that in my sleep. Sorry, I didn't appreciate there were further amendments. I do apologise. Councillor Allen, were you wanting to say something? A further amendment?
Yes, please. Yes, please. I would like to move the officer's report with the 3 conditions that he has elucidated on just previously, please.
Which are?
The sustainability condition, the electricity charging points, and the ecology condition.
Can I second that, please?
Just very quickly, I'm sorry to disrupt, just to jump in. 20 and 21, which clearly are the sustainable strategy, electrical charging points. And please forgive me, my other suggestion about ecology being linked into condition, it is in fact within the report, and that's highlighted at condition number 19 on page 31. On page 31, which is, so yeah, apologies for that. So that could be omitted, Councillor Allen, I would suggest from your amendment.
Okay, and Councillor Heslop, you seconded that, are you?
I'll second that, yes.
Right, okay. Councillor Clark, see your hand up.
Yeah, I think Councillor Tate made a valid point there about the charging points with regards to Neasham Road, and I think there needs, although it is, a valid condition for the future, there needs to be a level of consistency, and we're just not having that at the moment. No, we can't impose one on one and not on another. So there needs to be a level of consistency, and to me, imposing charging points is not consistent with what we've done in the past.
I agree. I think it's got to be sorted before we get to consider these applications, so we know exactly what it is we're looking at. And I got to really support what Councillor Johnson said. We are digressing away from what is in this report. And can I please reiterate what Councillor Johnson said and ask members, please do not do that. It's all right having an idea and a suggestion, but at the end of the day, if it's not in the report, it's not in the report. Councillor Wallace, I think you wanted to come in again, please.
Just very briefly, can I concur with Councillor Clark, Councillor Johnson and Councillor Tate? And I think as a committee, maybe between now and the next meeting, we need to do maybe some conversations amongst ourselves, or maybe through you, Chair, just about, so we don't, this matter's gone on for over an hour and a half now, a single application, where we're dealing with matters which, frankly, didn't make it into officers' recommendations because they don't need to be recommended. And clearly there are some hot button issues, and properly so, around the environment. But really they're a matter for planning policy, I would have thought, rather than being raised individually in the meeting in the way that they have been. So I wonder whether we can use the time fruitfully between now and the next meeting. But certainly I won't be supporting the amendment for the reasons set out by Councillor Clark and Councillor Johnson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCollum.
Thank you, Chair. Can I follow in agreement with my colleague, Councillor Wallace, yourself, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Tate and Councillor Clark? I have to say, colleagues, I was slightly uncomfortable with the line of questioning to Mr. Barker. I didn't think it was particularly productive. In fact, slightly passively aggressive, perhaps. But time and YouTube will tell. I think we're dealing with issues here that are slightly beyond our remit at this point. I think we could, as a council and as a planning authority, address this if we so wish. That is something that is within our gift. As Mr. Barker said, we could request it and they would be obliged to provide it. That is something that I will leave with other members to consider. But as it is, I will not be supporting this amendment. I support the officer's recommendation as detailed in the initial report. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor McCollum. Councillor Tate, are you going to come in with something new?
It's just to add to what it's just to add to what Councillor Wallace and Councillor McCollum have just said. As a member on this committee, I'll be looking for guidance between now and the next meeting as to how our climate emergency impacts this, because I think the conversations we've had today, as I've previously said, have not been relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, anything different to say?
Not really, Chair, but other than the pussyfooting that we're going around about this climate change thing, we, the councillors, have decided among all 50 odd of us that we are driving down the climate change to net zero by 2050. It is we, the councillors, who have made that decision, not our officers. So we now sit in planning and make on judgment and passing developments which have, in many cases, do nothing to reduce our carbon emissions. The control of this, Chair, goes beyond us. It goes to our building regulation people. What they decide is between themselves, and rarely is that information fed back to any of us. Now, I would remind everybody that we, the councillors, have made that decision, and we, the councillors, should be fully aware of what we are approving, what we're agreeing to as far as building is concerned. We've got 10,000 houses theoretically coming along. Are we going to take this attitude on all 10,000 and at the end of 2000?
Councillor Lee, I'm going to stop you there, Councillor Lee.
Well,
I take
your point is relevant, Chair. It's very important. And if you want to bury your head in the sand, do so. But we are not doing what we said we would do.
Councillor Lee,
thank you.
Let me assure you, I do not bury my head in the sand when it comes to council issues. And can I just bear in mind, in fairness to this committee, the bulk of the members are brand new to planning. They've had no training other than learning on the hoof, and they are doing their very, very best. It's quite normal for members to have different questions pop up in their mind, and they have a right to ask a question. But I will not have digressing, and I'm making the point now. Please stick to what's in the paper. That's all you have to do, and not digress away with it by trying to bring in other things. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Paul, I'm taking it over to you now to sort this amendment out, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have an amendment moved by Councillor Allen and seconded by Councillor Heslop, and it is to insert a condition 20 and a condition 21. And just for the sake of clarity, I just wonder if I could ask Mr. Coates if he has some appropriate wording just for those conditions so we know exactly what it is that we're voting on at this point.
Yes, I do. As we explained, the ecology link is within condition number 19 within the recommendation, so that doesn't need to be there. The 2 points I've suggested, perhaps I can read them out. Prior to the commencement of development, a detailed sustainability strategy outlining energy conservation, for the buildings shall be submitted to and approved by the LPA and implemented in accordance with those approved details. That's the first element. The second one, with a particular regard to electrical charging points, is prior to the commencement of development, details of electrical charging points shall be submitted to and approved by the LPA and thereafter implemented. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to confirm with Councillor Allen, that covers what it was that you wished to move as an amendment, did it?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, okay, members. So what we're voting for now is to grant planning permission subject to the 19 conditions outlined within the submitted report and with the addition of the 2 conditions that Mr. Coates has just read out to members. So if you can indicate whether you are for or against this amendment. Councillor Allen.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Cousins.
Against.
Councillor Heslop.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
You're on mute, Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Keir.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Marshall.
Against.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor Tate.
Against.
And Councillor Wallace.
Against.
Thank you very much. You bear with me, members. So that's that's 3 votes for the amendment, Chair, 9 votes against. The amendment has fallen. We revert back to the substantive motion originally moved by Councillor Wallace and seconded by Councillor Clark, that being to grant planning permission subject to the 19 conditions outlined within the submitted report.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, members. End of that one.
Do you want me to take a vote on the substantive motion, Chair?
Oh, yes, okay. Thank you.
Unless there's anything else to be moved, I'll move straight to the vote then. So again, if you can indicate for or against the motion moved by Councillor Wallace and seconded by Councillor Clark. Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Heslop.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Jones.
For.
Councillor Keir.
For.
Councillor Lee.
You're on mute.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
You're on mute.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor Tate.
For.
And Councillor Wallace.
For.
Thank you. So that's 9 votes for, 3 against. The motion is carried, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. Can we now move on to, there are no supplementary items. Are there any part 1 questions, please? No. Move to part.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Keir.
Yeah, just based on that discussion and what was said, are we going to have some get together before the next planning meeting? Because I think today absolutely highlights some fundamental flaws in what we're trying to do here, and I think we have to discuss where we do want to go with our policy in the future in respect to electric charge vehicles and that type of thing as we go forward, just to try and get some bring us back together and getting us all going the same road. So I would propose we try and do something, if that's okay, Chair.
I would agree with you entirely, Councillor Kay. I was going to have this discussion with Mr. Coates when the meeting had ended. I do think we need a good tidying up exercise, and so that we all know exactly what it is we're going through. I think I've got Councillor Tate's hand as well. Councillor Tate?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm on the same page as Councillor Keir. I've also sent an email to Luke Swinow for legal guidance on it, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hang on. Me, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee. I didn't see any more hands still flying up. Okay. Councillor Lee, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Tate, you finished, I think. Councillor
Yeah, thank
Lee.
you. Just to remind everybody, Andy's absolutely right. We do need to get this sorted out. But the emphasis and the objective and the main priority has got to be climate change, irrespective of what planning policy is, irrespective of whatever it is. We've set our stall out, and the major, most important problem that we have in Darlington and across Britain and across the world is climate change. So that must take priority above anything else. And that if it needs to be planning policy within the council, then so be it. The argument about, well, we're making this by putting the battery charging points in. We haven't done it before. I'm sorry, but that's just crazy. You've always got to start somewhere. There's got to be a starting point. And the decision by taking that attitude, nothing will change in the next, I don't know how many years, the next 30 years, by which time climate change will be on us. Open up your minds, open up your ambitions, and let's just make a difference in Darlington as far as climate change is concerned.
Okay, Councillor Wallace, we know your point, Councillor Lee, on climate change.
Well, yeah, you'll get it more and more, Doris. And not only from me, but I'm sure by a lot of other people.
Yeah, take your point. Councillor Wallace.
Are you going to pay for it, Gerald?
Chair.
That's enough, thank you. Councillor Wallace, Councillor Wallace, sorry. Can we cut their mics off, please? Councillor Wallace.
Can't get a word in. I just wonder, Chair, as well, whether we can ask Mr Dalton to circulate the council procedure rules on motions, amendments and procedure. I have to say, when I was mayor last year, I had to read them again. I'm a very long-standing member and I couldn't remember half of it, to be sure. I don't think we've exactly covered ourselves in glory as a committee this afternoon. And I think we'd all benefit from a refresh on how what we should do and when as far as procedure is concerned.
Yes, okay, Councillor Heslop. Can you round up, please?
I would just like to concur with everything that Councillor Lee has just said. There was an email we got last year that every committee, scrutiny or otherwise, had the duty to put climate change questions basically to every meeting. So really, it shouldn't come as a surprise that they come in to planning as well. But I do think, like we had last month about sort of the obesity issue and fast food outlets, I think we need pretty quickly to have a look at the climate change issues regarding to planning. There is other authorities, despite what people say, there's other authorities that are way further down the game than what Darlington Borough Council is. I'm looking at York, and I'm looking at Mr. Courtler probably read the stuff about, I think it's called Passive of House. You know, and the recommendations. Now, there's a lot of good stuff that this group are doing, Passive as House I'm talking about, that I think we could learn from. And I would advise members to at least Google it and have a look so we can have a meeting about which way we're going. Regarding Councillor Tate's point about we didn't do it at the meeting about Nation Road, I actually voted against Nation Road, and we all live and learn, and we're entitled to sort of bring new things as we learn new things. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Heslop. I'm going to go on round and round in circles here, Councillor Allen and Councillor Keir. I think your hands are up again. Councillor Allen, anything
yes, please.
new that's not been
just
said?
A final comment. I'd like to thank Mr. Coates, because what he has tried to do within the planning law and the planning rules and regulations that he is bound to abide by is he has tried to take into consideration everything that we've said, by offering to give us conditions which will put our minds at rest and will also enable future applications to be decided likewise. He's actually looking at a way forward, and for the other councillors to think that these things are unimportant and not worth the time. I just find that very disappointing, really, and not very futuristic. But I thank Mr. Coates.
Right, can I Councillor Keir?
I don't think MD's saying it's unimportant. I think we all had a bit of tang about it. I think this time, at this particular moment, that amendment wasn't what we've seen was right, and that's why the meeting is required. And I think if we go forward, it's not that anybody's any is any better than anybody else in these decisions. I think we debated it on the various things that were there, and that's right and the right thing for us to do. But to say that nobody was concerned about what what Mr. Coates done is wrong, Councillor Allen. We did consider it. Dave tried to give us a way out, and we just didn't agree with it, because I think a lot of us want to get sat down, and we're starting to hold the discussion about what we're going to hold in the meeting in the future. So for me, I think we should hold it, we've made our decision, and I would just hope that it gets passed, that we have a meeting sometime between now and the next planning meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Ken. I'm going to say the final thing before we move on. I'm not going to open it to anybody else after this, but I think you've got to stop beating yourselves up. This committee does the best it can with applications. We consider the applicants very, very carefully, and we do our utmost to be guided by the professional people in the planning department that guide us. And we have really, so far, I think, as members, we've made excellent decisions. Don't beat yourselves up. If you go off the point, it's only yourself to blame that's digressed off the point, nobody else, not officers or anybody. So can I just leave it at that? Thank you. And I have asked if you want to move anything on part 2, please. No? Right, thank you very much. We recommend that part 2 be received, and that takes us down to part 3, as there are no further questions. And I recommend that, pursuant to section 100B (5) of the Local Government Act